So two notable ones linked to those megatrends I just mentioned were livestock and horticulture. And so we try to better understand, who has the distribution of market power in those value chains. What is their position on different policy issues, and what has been some of the binding constraints to getting traction on those policy issues.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chakula Podcast. The Chakula Podcast is a podcast of the Root to Food Initiative, and on this podcast we delve into critical issues surrounding our food and farming systems in Kenya and beyond. In today's discussion, we'll be talking about critical issues that shape our agri-food systems around the globe, specifically focusing on the political economy of food in Kenya and also beyond, unpacking the challenges, opportunities in transforming agri-food systems. Our focus will be guided by the recently published sourcebook by IFPRI, which is International Food Policy Research Institute. That's IFPRI. They launched a political economy and policy analysis sourcebook, which is a comprehensive guide to understanding and navigating the complex landscape of policy, economics, and development in the realm of food, land, and water. I know this sounds heavy, but I really hope our two guests today will be able to break it down and ensure that our kawaida mwananchi, someone who's not an expert in this field, understands more on what political economy of food is all about. So I'll hand over to Jonathan and Danielle, who work with CIAT and also IFPRI, to introduce themselves and what they do and who they are. Thank you.
Or maybe I can start. So my name is Jonathan Mockshell. An agricultural and food policy economist by training, working at the Alliance Biodiversity CIAT, and also the political economy lead for the CGIAR Initiative on national policies and strategies. And as part of the CGIAR Initiative on national policies and strategies, which co-creates demand-driven policy solutions with national institutions and also aiming at supporting countries to transform food, land, and water systems within the development space, but also to ensure a sustainable future for all. And we're working around 8 different countries. Kenya is one of them. Nigeria, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Egypt, Laos, and India, and Colombia are also some other countries in which we work in. At Alliance Biodiversity CIAT, our work mainly focuses on food and agricultural systems to transform food systems into a more sustainable, efficient, and inclusive one, using evidence-based research solutions and also co-creation of knowledge. And some of the topics that we focus on are climate action, food environment, multifunctional landscapes, agrobiodiversity, gender and digital inclusion. And we are part of the CG system, which Danielle mentioned earlier on, which is a global partnership for food, land, and water. And both IFPRI and Alliance Biodiversity CIAT are part of this global partnership. So looking forward to contributing to this discussion, and over to you, Danielle.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Feli, for the invitation to be part of this podcast today. My name's Danielle Resnick. I'm a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we have offices in over a dozen countries, mostly in Africa, but also in Asia, including an office in Kenya. IFPRI is almost a 50-year-old institution. It's part of the CGIAR consortium of agricultural research institutes. It is a more social science-based institute. We do a lot of work on food transformation, of course, agriculture and nutrition policy, environmental issues, social protection issues, and increasingly also looking at urban food system challenges. I'm a political scientist by training. I do a lot of work on political economy of policy process research, whether in the food, nutrition, or environmental domains. So thanks again for the invitation and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much and welcome to the show once again. It's quite interesting to have at least the both of you with two different, in as much as yes, you work on food and food policy, it's quite interesting to have someone working on the political aspect and also someone who's working on the agricultural aspect. So basically, just to start off our conversation, just a few things that I will mention before we start is the fact that agricultural sector remains critically important, specifically in Kenya, constituting 65% of the country's exports, accounting for half of the GDP, with 26% directly and another 25% indirectly, and 60% of employment. So, and also improved agricultural growth in recent years is partially responsible for a decline in the rural poverty rate from 50 to 40% between 2006 and 2016. And I think also just to start off, it's the fact that political economy is the elephant in the room, and definitely it plays a major role in policy decisions related to agricultural growth and transformation. And at the moment, we see that our agri-food systems are facing unprecedented challenges. This is information from the PEPA sourcebook, and it's exacerbated by factors such as COVID-19 pandemic, civil conflicts, and of course, climate change. And of course, there are also other underlying factors that also affect the other underlying structural causes of food insecurity. So these challenges go beyond the immediate need for technological solutions. They demand an understanding of the political and economic drivers that shape our food and farming systems. So Danielle and Jonathan, could you just share with our listeners some context on what political economy is and policy analysis, and why is it needed? In layman's language, if that's possible.
Okay, maybe I can start off on that. So political economy is generally thinking more intentionally about, who's supporting policy reforms and who might be opposing them. So we think about what are the different costs and benefits of policy instruments that we need to make our food systems more sustainable, and who will be the winners and potential losers from those different reforms. And then who has the voice to really influence decision making? So, do the potential losers of reforms, are they stronger than the potential winners? And those different factors, the costs and benefits, the winners and losers, and who has voice, is really reflective of interest group dynamics. Are we motivated more by material interest in terms of the price of food, or if you think of food industries, are they more motivated by profit or by social sustainability objectives? Besides interest, we think about ideas, which values and ideas that are important to us. It may not be about agricultural productivity. It may be more about, sustainability is more important, even if it doesn't always lead to the highest agricultural yields. Or we think about food self-sufficiency. Some governments are really committed to ensuring that their countries have enough food, even if that may have negative implications for their trade policy in terms of putting up trade barriers. And so besides interests and ideas, we also think about institutions and how different types of institutions structure who has voice in the policy process. These can be farmers' institutions, they can be business lobbies, they can be explicitly political institutions, how different types of political systems, democracies versus more closed political systems, or presidential versus more parliamentary systems, influence the space for policy discussion. And so that's some of the factors we think about when we're talking about political economy. And those can also influence the broader policy process, where we think about even a broader set of variables that are important, including windows of opportunity, that lead for, change drivers to get their voice in the system. So you can think about a crisis can sometimes be a window of opportunity. A change in political administration can offer a window of opportunity. And we also think about who could be policy champions who can help advance the causes of the sustainable food systems transformation, for instance. And then finally, thinking about implementation capacities. Does the public sector, does the private sector have sufficient capacity to maybe advance some of the reforms that we would like to see on the ground for more sustainable food systems.
Thank you. That's well broken down. Yes, over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, so in addition to what Danielle just mentioned, and also during the introduction, you emphasize we have different backgrounds, but we kind of all bring in that different perspective or lens to conducting political economy analysis of food systems. And based on that, in the academic world, in terms of a broader definition, then that's one of the reasons why you have different backgrounds or different people contributing or working within the political economy field. So you might also see this as an interdisciplinary branch of social science, which brings together political economy, political science, economics, sociology, anthropology, and really focusing on how to make this as an interdisciplinary branch, but also looking at the interrelationships between politics, economics, political and economic systems, and also examining how individuals, private sector, public sector, government, public policy kind of shapes the policies that we have, the policy processes and policy outcomes, and how those policy decisions also make some winners, others losers, and how incentives can be used to compensate or drive behavior change with regards to policy. So that's kind of also on the academic level in terms of how our different backgrounds comes together within this interdisciplinary field to look at political economy of food systems.
Thank you. So I like how the both of you have been able to break it down. So it's clear that politics is a crucial component when it comes to our agri-food system policy making and strategy formulation. And just to also mention, political economy approaches can be traced back. Political approaches to agricultural development can be traced back to the first Green Revolution in the 1960s and 70s. And my next question will be, why is it important? And I know Danielle mentioned that when you talk about political economy, we look at who has the voice. But why is it important to always look at it?
Well, I mean, we think that it's quite important because, as you suggested earlier, a lot of policy changes can't just be driven by technology alone. And they can't just be driven by economic considerations. Often it's important to think about what are the costs and benefits of certain investments to support the agri-food system more broadly. But I think the political economy perspective, what it adds to it is seeing, are these different investment scenarios, for instance, are they politically feasible? Given what we know about the constellation of different interest groups on the ground and the different types of implementation capacities, as I alluded to earlier, among the public and private sector. So it gives a little bit more, we think, kind of a more realistic understanding of what's feasible and what's not. And helps us really try to uncover, who may be holding back reforms. Sometimes it may not be, among different societal interest groups. Sometimes there may be something happening internally within governments. Sometimes there's different debates among ministries, about what should be done. And so a political economy lens, tries to better illuminate where the binding constraint is in order to push reforms forward that otherwise seem, very practical from a technological or economic standpoint.
Thank you, Danielle. Jonathan?
Yeah, so let's say you have 100 bags of maize which you want to distribute in one of the, let's say, Kakamega County, for example. Mm-hmm. That 100 bags of maize that you have, you would want to distribute that in the most efficient and effective way so that the households that you are interested in will benefit from that subsidy program, let's say, from the government. And so just that 100 bags of maize will not be enough for all the people in the county. So now the question then is, who really gets some of the maize and who is out? And that's where the politics and the political economy comes in. The kind of decision making process that guides that sort of distribution, the politics angle. So in this context, whilst we see that the economics, the policies, the cost-benefit analysis, everything is extremely important. In terms of who really gets what and why and how the person gets it, kind of fundamental questions when it comes to economics. And that the need to combine the two really helps us to better design those policies in a way that will meet the needs of society. And if we want to transition, if we want to provide social protection, if we want to improve the effectiveness of government interventions, we really need to understand this part of the politics with regards to the distribution of social protection programs. And once we understand that and contextualize that within a specific location and see the drivers, the decisions, the coalitions that shape all these decision-making processes, and see how that can be used or applied in other contexts, really helps us to make our development interventions most effective. So for me, I think that's one fundamental reasons why we really need to bring in the political economy angle in all the work we do, and particularly if we want to achieve a more inclusive and sustainable food systems. This is a key or fundamental thing that we need to consider.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Maybe a follow-up question, and I hope it comes out very correctly. I'm just trying to think, maybe for our listeners, yes, you've given a really good example, but in terms of like Kenya, where are we with the new regime, with the new government in Kenya? Where are we when you talk about political economy of food? Does that question really make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and particularly I think with this new regime and looking at the bottom-up economic policy which the government is aiming at bringing out. I think one of the key things is that we see that as a different form of policy. And with that program, how the government wants to influence resource mobilization and how the different actors or constituents tend to either oppose to that policy or subscribe to that policy, will be important to really see if that program will work or wouldn't work in the context of Kenya. So it kind of also helps us to see what's the reason behind that policy, and with that specific program, will the government be able to achieve the developmental intervention it wants to achieve? And when will the government pull back on such a policy? For example, if we have a number of coalitions that are kicking against the policy, or if people start complaining that it's leading to high taxation, or inflation is increasing, unemployment is increasing, will that kind of influence the government decision to hold back on such an economic policy? So all these are kind of drivers that once we bring in the political economy lens, we are able to see the power dynamics that influence implementing such a policy, or even holding back on such a policy, or reforming the entire policy in a way that meets the demands of the people. And one thing that also comes out is that in terms of political economy, for a government, one of the top priorities is to provide the kind of services that is important for the population. But at the same time, the government is also interested in maximizing those benefits in a way that could lead to a re-election. So if there are things that influence or could jeopardize that form of re-election, in some cases, depending on the type of democratic system, the government might want to push back.
Yeah. And just maybe to also add, Jonathan, and you can just help me here, is that basically from the research that what I've been reading is that when reading around basically political economy of food and some of the policies that are being pushed, I find that specifically even here in Kenya, specifically they're focusing so much on production, and the aspect of affordability is always ignored.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of looking at it. And in this case, and if you maximize production or you increase productivity, then what will happen is that supply would increase. And one would generally think that once supply increases, it should lead to lower prices, and in this case, to bring about affordability. But if that is not happening, there are a number of reasons why that might not be happening. And in the context of Kenya, for example, it could be that although with increased productivity, maybe some of the product is leaving Kenya to neighboring countries. And for that reason, what is remaining in the domestic market is too low in order to drive down prices. It could also mean that maybe there is likely price fixing from, let's say, the different farm organizations in order to maintain the prices. So this, in this case, you need a government policy instrument to be able to correct, for example, to place an export ban on some of the production so that the production will remain in the country, or to place a price ceiling, for example, so that prices of those commodities cannot be sold higher than a certain price. So this is where you need a government policy to come in to be able to correct some of these anomalies that might happen.
Yeah, thank you. And I think now we'll just go back to the PEPA sourcebook that was launched this year. And why specifically did the team decide to publish, or basically why did the team decide to come up with a sourcebook?
So political economy has been gaining more salience within the CGIAR, where we both, our institutions are both part of. But there is a clear recognition that because it encompasses very different disciplines, we're a political scientist and economist, but we also have agronomists within our system. We have sociologists, we have geographers. Everyone was talking about political economy, but not in a consistent way. Mm-hmm. And also we're wanting to, talk about not just food systems transformation, but land and water transformation. And so we felt it would be a very useful tool to bring together the various frameworks that are out there, both around political economy, but around policy process making more broadly, as a source book for anyone, regardless of their disciplinary background, to turn to and say, okay, if I'm interested, in how to advance, water system reforms, for instance, what are some good frameworks that are already out there that could give us some leverage on the political economy dynamics. So it was really a way to, offer a consolidated source for both researchers, practitioners, civil society groups to refer to when they wanted to use a political economy lens to better understand a policy issue facing the food, land, or water system.
Jonathan, anything to add?
No, I think that Danielle said it all. And I think one of the main gaps that I also see is that the policy environment, I would say, influences every decision, as we kind of mentioned earlier on.
Yeah.
Failure to understand or unpack what really happens within that policy environment will mean that development interventions would have success, or there will be failure. So if we want to deal with all the poly crisis and structural weaknesses and institutional weaknesses we have, then we really need to understand what works where, why, and how. And this will be very important in developing development interventions or designing the development interventions. And with this source book, we provide a tool, a ready-to-use tool, which is very consistent to the food, land, and water domains, the first of its kind, and can be used by different actors that Danielle kind of to really understand how to influence the policy environment for the success of development interventions.
Yeah, thank you. And how can the frameworks provided by the sourcebook be applied in real-world scenarios? What can we learn from successful interventions, and how can we avoid pitfalls that hinder transformative change in agri-food systems?
So maybe I will start off with the first part, and then we can continue with the second part of the question with regards to the frameworks that we have. So we've kind of systematically examined all the potential frameworks that can be categorized under food, land, and water domains. So we have these three domains. Within these three domains, you can also have aspects of environment, you can have aspects of climate change, you can have aspects of nutrition. And based on this, we've looked at all the possible frameworks that can be linked to each of these domains and the specific tools that can be used. So with regards to how these frameworks can be used, once you think about a specific policy problem, for example, increasing food prices in Kenya, or the prevalence of ultra-processed food in Kenya, for example. If you think about that as a policy problem, you can map this to one of the three domains. So this will fall under food and nutrition domain. And based on this domain, we have a set of frameworks. So you can have the kaleidoscope framework, which was designed by Danielle and other colleagues from IFPRI. We have the institutional analysis and development framework, the AD framework. We have the advocacy coalition framework, narrative policy analysis framework. So any of these frameworks can pick to the specific policy problem. And once we determine this framework, we will be able to see the key elements of the framework. So within the kaleidoscope, for example, we have 16 to 18 different indicators which can be used to examine policy change, policy reform, and the type of indicators, whether if such reform, if these indicators exist, would we be able to have a reform or a policy change within the context of ultra-processed food or increasing food prices in Kenya. So based on that, you're able to see exactly which elements of the framework to apply. And we have that kind of spelled out within the source book with specific examples and also the context and the analytical tools that you can be used to conduct this analysis.
Thank you, Jonathan. Danielle, anything to add?
Yeah, so with regards to the second part of your question, what we can learn from successful interventions and avoid pitfalls. I think one of the frameworks that Jonathan alluded to, the kaleidoscope model of policy change, highlights some real issues that we need to take into account when we're designing policy reforms. And actually, that particular model talks about 16 different variables that are quite key in the policy agenda setting process, the design, adoption, implementation, and evaluation and reform process. And we've applied it to look at issues, that are very key in a place like Kenya, like input subsidy programs. Also large-scale food fortification, which is when, certain vitamins, iron, vitamin A, iodine are added to the food system. And trying to understand when you saw those reforms take off and when you saw opposition. And some key things that emerge is, one about the importance of having powerful policy champions on board. If you have an opponent to your reforms who are quite politically powerful, you're not going to get much movement with the reform. But if you can convince and engage early on quite powerful policy champions, that's much more instrumental to getting change. Another lesson learned is the importance of mobilizing broad coalitions, engaging with, those who may come from very different perspectives, but yet may all be aligned in terms of the policy outcome that you want to see. And so bringing kind of the broader the set of actors that you can bring on board, the more likely that you can have a more successful and sustainable reform option. And then third is always being conscious about that implementing capacity. A lot of reforms are adopted without thinking about whether governments have the money to implement them, and if they actually have the capacity on the ground. If you think about a place like Kenya, that has gone through a pretty substantive devolution reform, a lot of different agricultural functions are now devolved to the county level, including, issues around agricultural and veterinary research and extension services. And so if you're going to be doing, reforms that involve those services, you really need to make sure that at the county level, that your staff actually have the capacity to roll out some of those reforms. So that gives you kind of a broad sense, thinking about the powerful policy champions, the broad coalitions, and being thoughtful about implementation capacity. Those are some key lessons we've learned from some of the models in the PEPA sourcebook.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that in a simpler way. But also, Jonathan mentioned we need to look at what works where and how, and you also mentioned something to do with input subsidy program. So are they effective, the input subsidy program, and is agroecology really the answer?
Well, I could talk about the input subsidies, and maybe Jonathan wants to focus more on agroecology. Whether input subsidy programs are effective or not, it depends on what the original objective was of the program. These programs, which have really spread throughout Africa, you saw a regeneration of input subsidy programs from about 2010 onwards. They've had very different objectives across countries. Some are intended to enhance agricultural productivity. Some are intended they're effectively more of a cash transfer program. In effect, they're effectively kind of a social protection system for the poorest farmers. And so in those circumstances, even if you don't have high agricultural productivity, but you're seeing, at least the incomes of smallholders being protected, you could still judge that as being effective. I think the collection of research on this is that one of the problem with input subsidy programs, which typically include both subsidizing fertilizer and seed, is that they are often not properly targeted to the soil composition. In particular country, you may, obviously every country has a diversity of agroecological conditions, and sometimes these programs are very standardized, so they're not being well targeted to that variation that you're seeing in the agroecology. And so, some more targeted programs, ensuring that they're not promoting kind of monocrop agriculture, that they're not just promoting kind of cereals production, is a real concern. And thinking about, different ways we can bring in technology to better promote microdosing of fertilizer, for instance, so that farmers are not overusing fertilizer, that they're using the appropriate amount. And I think that's one of the concerns sometimes with these programs, is that they're maybe promoting, an excess use of fertilizer in particular regions where it's either not the appropriate amount, much less could be used, or much more is actually needed, or it's not appropriately targeted to the underlying agroecological conditions. So that's kind of a broad answer to your question. Whether they're effective really depends on the original objectives, but there are some overarching concerns, as I alluded to, about how some of these have been designed thus far.
And Jonathan, on agroecology,
yeah? Yeah. So I would say that agroecology is part of the answer. And the reason why it's part of the answer is that agroecology is not a one-size-fits-all solution to the crisis that we are having. So in this context, a specific example will be agroecology depends on 13 different principles or 10 elements with 5 levels of transformation. And this transformation can be transformative or incremental. So depending on which country or which region, agroecology can be the answer, or can be part of the answer, or can be the main solution. To put this into context, if we take Western Kenya and if we take the northern region of Ghana, these are two different agroecological zones. So in Western Kenya, you might not necessarily need that kind of amount of fertilizer that you need, and the amount of resource capacity that is there is very different from what you have in northern Ghana. So in this context, you really need to see what is the best fit solution for that specific location, and that should influence the policy design and program design and implementation. So within agroecology, where you have, for example, a principle focusing on reducing fertilizer use, if you bring that to the Amazon region, that will work. But in northern Ghana, that would not work. In Western Kenya, that would likely also work. But in the northern part of Uganda, that wouldn't work. But rather, you might need some sort of fertilizer or even more fertilizer because the soil content, the soil fertility is not as rich as you might find in the Amazon region. And so the real solution is it's about the best fit solution, and that should be a combination of farming pathways. So apart from agroecology, you can have regenerative agriculture, you can have climate smart agriculture, you can have conservation agriculture. So depending on the location, the argument is to have a best fit option, which would be a combination of the strengths of all these different types of farming pathways, including agroecology, in order to be able to design the most effective policy and program that meets the needs of that location or specific area.
Yeah, Jonathan, just a quick clarification. You have mentioned about conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and climate-smart agriculture. Perhaps you could break down what conservation agriculture is, what regenerative agriculture is, and what climate-smart agriculture is, and what's the difference between the three of them and also agroecology.
Yeah, so these are different farming pathways, and you might kind of want to look at this on a continuum. If you move from your left-hand side to your right-hand side, on this continuum, on the left-hand side, you might want to call that, for example, sustainable agriculture. And then as you move to the right-hand side, you might want to call that sustainable intensification of agriculture. Now, all these four different pathways or farming pathways can fit on this continuum, but different position or at different points. So as you move from the left to the right, sustainable agriculture, agroecology, for example, will fit over there under sustainable agriculture. And then as you move more to the right-hand side, you have sustainable intensification. And at extreme end, you can put climate smart agriculture over there. So that's one of the main differences in terms of this continuum. But looking at it from the differences, that can be looked at from what the key practices are for each of the pathway. So under agroecology, the 13 principles, some of the key things that we highlight over there, which is different from the other pathways, are we need co-creation of knowledge within agroecology. There is a strong emphasis on food sovereignty. There is a strong emphasis on civil society organization participation and farmer organization participation. So agroecology essentially looks into maximization of ecological practices and limited use of external input use. So maximizing the ecological processes that you find within a location in order to increase productivity, and with a strong focus on the bottom down. So in this case, having farmers taking a leading role, having cooperatives, and emphasis on food sovereignty, food security. So that's agroecology. And in this context, it also emphasizes less use of chemicals or agrochemicals. On climate smart agriculture, which is the extreme end, you don't have emphasis on having smallholder agriculture or having farmer-based organizations, but it also allows the use of GMOs, for example, and also allows the use of agrochemicals. So that's one of the fundamental difference, and it has a lot of emphasis on climate mitigation and adaptation, including the use of hybrid seeds and improved seed varieties that's able to adapt to changing climate. Within the middle, where you have conservation agriculture based on cover cropping and mulching, and also limited tillage, that is a different set of principles. So that will come directly after agroecology. And then the final one on regenerative agriculture, which I would say is the new baby on the block, emphasizes a lot on soil fertility, soil health, improved use of chemicals, but that's also a bit much closer to agroecology.
Oof, thank you. That's a bit heavy. And coming from a point of view where we champion agroecology as a solution, I'm also really a bit confused on what really looks like the best approach and the most sustainable and the most inclusive. I guess for me, I'll be very biased and I'll still stick to agroecology. So, yeah. And I think as we wrap up the show, just one last question is, what does the future hold for Kenya's agri-food systems, and how can the insights from the PEPA sourcebook contribute to a more sustainable and equitable food future?
Okay, well, I could start off on that, Feli. Kenya, like many different parts of Africa, are facing a variety of different what we call mega trends. One is obviously the impact of climate change, and that's been obvious for the past few seasons, and how that's affected particularly the north of Kenya and the livelihoods of the pastoralist communities there. Another mega trend is, of course, rapid urbanization. Kenya has just, about 27% of its population in urban areas right now, but by 2050, half of the population is expected to be in urban areas. And that's going to create, a big demand for improved nutrition in cities. How do you ensure that your urban populations have access to fresh fruits and vegetables at affordable prices that are also safe from a food safety perspective, and don't contribute to foodborne diseases? Both of these issues we looked at using one of the frameworks that's touched on in the PEPA sourcebook. It's called Political Economy of Value Chains Framework. We looked at this in Kenya. We were tracing through some different value chains in the country. So two notable ones linked to those megatrends I just mentioned were livestock and horticulture. And so we tried to better understand, who has the distribution of market power in those value chains. What is their position on different policy issues, and what has been some of the binding constraints to getting traction on those policy issues. So, for instance, of course, with livestock, it's a very valuable value chain in Kenya, but the pastoralist community gets very little of that value. Of course, a lot of the power, as we uncovered, is very much concentrated amongst the traders. And of course, the large scale cattle owners. So even though, a majority of the domestic beef, for instance, that's consumed in Kenya is coming from pastoralist communities, they're not getting a sizable share of returns. And so by kind of using the framework, we can see, who is having the market power, and why things like the livestock marketing bill, which has been on the table for quite some time in Kenya, why that has been stalling over successive political administrations. Similarly, we looking at horticulture and the importance of that for feeding Kenya's cities. There's a lot of emphasis in the Kenya export horticulture subsector on meeting food safety standards for the export market, particularly for the EU. There's not much focus on domestic food safety. And so, highlighting that there's a real lack of civil society demand, consumer groups pushing for domestic food safety is one of the kind of, binding constraints that we uncovered from using the framework focused on that particular value chain. So I'll stop with those two examples, but I think they give a little bit of a flavor of how at least one of the frameworks in the PEPA sourcebook can be applied to these issues in Kenya.
So I think that Danielle kind of nailed it with those two examples. And the minor thing I just want to add is that for Kenya, the policy environment is it's an interesting one, and especially looking at the transition now to a new regime and the changes that's happening now. So it gives us the right time to really be able to use the PEPA sourcebook, looking at some of the key challenges we have in Kenya now with inflation, employment, high food prices, taxation, etc. The PEPA sourcebook now really gives us those frameworks that we need to be able to generate those key insights in a very rapid way that will be able to inform policy decision, but also response to some of these policies as they come in a very dynamic way with the right insight to support reforms in Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The conversation has been very, very insightful and also very, very light. And I hope our listeners will also agree with us that the conversation has been very, very light. So thank you for joining us, Danielle and Jonathan. Do you have any parting shot that you wanted to say during the whole conversation that you've not said that you really want to share to our listeners?
No, just to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, Philly.
Yeah, no, same here. Thanks. I also enjoyed the conversation and hoping that our listeners will benefit from it, but also looking forward to applying the PEPA sourcebook in Kenya.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Chakula podcast. We hope the exploration of the political economy of food in Kenya and beyond, and also just looking at the PEPA sourcebook, has provided valuable insights. Remember to subscribe for future episodes, and as always, let's keep the conversation going to create a more resilient and inclusive food future. I'm your host, Phyllis Tesmolia. Thank you.